Welcome back to RecalibrAgency. I'm pleased today to be joined by Jim Remsik. He is the founder of Flagrant. Jim, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Flagrant?
Sure. So Flagrant started in January of 2020. Seemed like a good time. No looming pandemics on the horizon or anything like that. It was just the two of us, me and my first employee at the time. And we've grown to 13 today and got some more on the horizon. But yeah, not my first rodeo. This is about the fifth or sixth consultancy that I've been in or part owner of. And yeah, looking forward to our chat.
Awesome. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about how to overcome agency growing pains and navigate some of the harsh realities that are just a natural part of owning and growing an agency. So, Jim, what are some of the strategies and tactics that you've seen impact an agency's ability to scale quickly through the various agencies that you've led?
I mean, I think one of the things that we've always done is that we've really aimed for mutual success, and that's with customers, that's with employees, and I've known a number of other shop owners, and there might be immediate success if you're trying to get the least expensive labor or the best biggest pricing on the deal, but I think long term that has been a tactic that we've used for growth over the long term is, we have people coming back to us. They're happy. They're getting a good deal. We have employees. I have an employee right now. I friend an employee who has worked with me over the last three companies and over the last decade. And so, playing the long game has been crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're playing that long game, are you focusing on relationship development and having your team members develop relationships as well? What does that look like?
Absolutely. You know, as I was talking to my therapist on Monday, we were talking about work, and she said that you all sound like a family. And I took offense at that because you don't really get to choose your family sometimes. And there's lots of dysfunctional family dynamics. And I think that's a pretty good analogy sometimes for work. But I think that, we have a group today and typically try and work towards a group that is very supportive of one another. It's not a zero sum game. And so I routinely tell people when we're hiring that I would prefer that they grow up and out and go on and have bigger, better careers because at the end of the day, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so there's there's very little, positive impact to, winding up having to fire somebody or, just taking advantage of people.
That's a really interesting perspective, Jim, because it's really common for business owners to want to retain talent and make sure that they stay for the long haul. But it sounds like you would rather grow your talent and see them go off onto other adventures. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it feels like common knowledge, but common sense isn't always common. So, I think one of the ways that I've heard it described is that, what if we train these people, we teach them new skills and they leave? And the opposite is, what if we don't and they stay? And, you have good people moving on and people who are less interested in growth and improving themselves sticking around, then you wind up having to carry that weight.
And that kind of goes along with the general business advice that you never want to be the smartest person in the room. As the business owner, you want your employees to be smarter than you. And so, what do you do to develop and train employees? And how do you safeguard any tribal knowledge loss as people do move on to other things?
That is a great question. I think what we try and do is to work together a lot. It's not always a thing that we're able to do. And it is often easiest to sell the smartest person in the room, which, mission accomplished, it ain't me. But, we have one of our developers who, since he's worked with us, has sort of been staff log on projects most of the time. And that feedback is coming back that he would like to work with the rest of the team. We work with our team because we like our team. And, he hasn't really gotten that opportunity. You know, I think we do biweekly sharing events. Some people call them lunch and learns. We carve out a half an hour each every other week, and we have an event called Clap and Cringe, where we encourage people to not only share the successes of what they're working on or things that have gone well, but some of the dirty underbelly of projects where things aren't great, and that is an opportunity for people to get exposed to, oh, this is how it could go wrong. And I think that's way more valuable in most cases than just seeing the positive, happy side of projects.
Yeah, and it sounds like you do those clap and cringe discussions while projects are ongoing, as opposed to maybe waiting until the project is wrapped up and doing a post-mortem. What's some of the value that you've seen by making sure that you are harnessing time during the project duration to evaluate what's actually going on and not just assume that everything is rainbows and butterflies?
Yeah, I think, in addition to clap and cringe, we also do retrospectives. And I will fully admit that we don't do them as often as we should sometimes. And you have to make time, you have to be intentional about wanting to do that. A lot of times those retrospectives, if you do them along the way or clap and cringe, if you take the time during a project, then you have the ability to affect that project, not just future projects. And, it might mean that you have to swap a person out on a project to give another set of skills or somebody who's had a different experience. But it is helpful in that you are addressing the problem as it's happened. The further that you get away from the problem, the less likely you're going to be able to impact that problem or learn about how to improve it for the future.
Would you say that that approach is what has helped your team to scale the number of projects that they can deliver on at a time and helped you scale the agency? Or is it kind of separate?
I think that attitude is very helpful and it helps to build that cohesion on the team. There's a lot of empathy for each other, especially when people are sharing things that aren't going well. Has it explicitly helped us to scale? Probably. It's one of those things. That's not why we do it. That's a byproduct of it though, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like in your focus on building a company culture that can scale sustainably, the result has been things like the clap and cringe and your relief valve meetings. And you even told me about your recharge and reset activities as well. What are some of the differences that you've seen in your teams as you've implemented those tactics, especially as teams shift and change constantly during agency growth?
Yeah, I think so. Reset and recharge we have a monthly recharge, which is just our team wants to work together with each other. And without the opportunity for clients to pay us to do that, we said, we're going to carve out 2 hours at the end of each month to just spend time with one another, maybe play games or just chat. Again, that gives people the opportunity to connect with the other humans on the team and build empathy and understanding. With Reset, that came out of an experiment that we ran. And in fact, last November, we introduced an experiment framework into the company, which is fairly simple and has roots in the scientific method. But anybody in the company can give us a hypothesis of what they think will change if we run an experiment. They need to tell us how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take to see results, what success looks like, what failure looks like, and who is the accountable party. There has to be one individual accountable for it. And that accountable has both accounting for the cost of it, but also who's telling the tale, like who is saying this was a successful experiment because, or this failed because. And so Flagrant Reset came from our admin assistant who noticed that there was this desire to do the recharge, but she wanted to take it a step further and get us together for an hour each week that we don't have a recharge. And she wanted to facilitate workshops, 1 hour workshops in each of those. And so her background is in education and she laid out a 12-week workshop schedule and brought everything from discussions of love language and trauma to a writing workshop and measuring before and after to make sure that people were getting value out of it. And so back to your original question, that it allowed us to, see this leader that we had on the team in a role that, isn't specifically a leadership role, but, you know, exposed to us this value that we had inside the company that wouldn't have otherwise been there.
Absolutely. It sounds like you're identifying leaders in the terms of leading by influence as opposed to leading by title.
Yeah, this is a thing that I struggle with because I am not particularly title driven. In fact, people fairly routinely give me the title of CEO, and the person that I think of as a CEO, that's not a compliment. And so that is, I typically try to, downplay my title as much as possible. But the reality is a lot of business works on titles. And so I've actually gone the opposite direction and made sure that people either have right sized their title or, potentially even inflated it a little bit just because it sets expectations before you meet people. And so we had I had one employee at a previous agency that I ran who we gave a director role. They were our director of consulting and way more than qualified for that role. We wound up laying them off, and their next job, they got a VP role, and they never would have gotten that VP role if they didn't have a director role, was their assertion. And so whether that was true of the company or whether it was true of her, like seeing that opportunity and taking it, that was what she reported back to me.
So as you're finding those leaders, as you're starting to delegate some of the responsibilities of business and making sure that the whole boat is running smoothly, what do you do to evaluate with different team members the unknowns of agency project runway and cash flow and lines of credit to determine how you can scale, how you can hire, and when you need different kinds of managers in place? Can you talk us through your perspective?
Yeah, I was introduced to the idea of or to this concept that if you can't all go out to dinner and sit around the same table, that is the point that you will wind up, if you don't do that intentionally, you will wind up with organic clicks forming and it is just we are group driven as a creature. And the reality of, breaking those groups down intentionally, if you're able to do that, means that, you have some form of control or at least you have some understanding of the motivation of how those groups are being broken down. And if you let it happen naturally, they might form for the wrong reason and potentially you'll get negative outcomes from that.
Do you have any advice for agency owners who might have clicks within their team right now that grew naturally and now they need to tame it and get rid of that issue? Do you have any advice for them?
If you can figure out why there is that's click forming, if why there is that separation between these two groups and address that, and those are hard things to do. And, those are even hard questions to ask. Sometimes it could be that they're broken on demographic lines. Sometimes it could be broken on skill lines. And what can you do to build more empathy across, the separation that you've got is probably how I would recommend addressing that.
If you're trying to break down the barriers between different groups of your team, it's effective to make sure that they can see what other people are doing because they know what their job is. They don't necessarily understand the challenges, the complications, the frustrations that other people have to work through on a daily basis, especially now that almost everyone is in a virtual work environment. So, finding ways to help other people see what is a day in another person's shoes on the team so that they can start to respect that role, the value that it brings to the team, the challenges that are overcome without anyone hearing about it, because there's a lot of that happens in agency life as well. Would you agree with that approach?
100%. And, you don't have to break down the barriers. You just have to let those folks get invited in from time to time, walk around and say, oh man, think about those things when you don't see them. And then all the implications of, what it means for the other side to have differences in their environment, differences in the challenges that they face. And so, getting people to lower the drawbridge and let folks in from time to time. That is what we try and do with Clap and Cringe, and we do have a developer roundtable and a design community meeting where we invite external folks who are that are islands of design in their workplace, just to give people some insight into what other people are experiencing.
Absolutely. And I want to circle back to something that you mentioned a few minutes ago about knowing when your agency can no longer be completely flat by evaluating if you went out to dinner, could we actually all sit at the same table? And that concept, that framework for knowing when you need to have delineation of management and responsibility and just building in those extra leaders within your organization, I think is really important. How do you then help bridge some communication breakdowns that can happen as you're starting to shift from more of a flat organization into a tiered and structured organization in order to scale?
Great question, hard problem, and one that I am experiencing from time to time. In the absence of information, we tell our own stories. And so this summer we have gone through a period where we had, close to half the team on the bench, and, with no input from me, because I knew what was going on and I had some expectation for when that situation was going to alleviate itself. I learned after the fact that people were dusting off their resume and preparing like they would just because they have been sitting on the bench for 2 months. That must mean that they're not valuable. That must mean that, there's some sort of trouble in the company. And the fact of the matter is we just hit a, a timing issue, and we had two clients drop off just before, the start of the summer, 4th of July weekend, new fiscal periods, July 1. And so our team is extremely valuable. And what I was trying to do was to also satisfy requests that they had made to work together more often. And so I was looking for a large project that staff a number of people on. But without communicating that, there was some anxiety, some nerves, and like, I don't know how much longer we can last like this coming, from the team. And so it wasn't until we had a management summit shortly thereafter, that got relayed up to me as like, oh, this is an easy question for me to answer. Like, it's a hard situation, no doubt, but it's not perilous.
It's interesting too that even amidst this culture that you built where there are regular team wide meetings to collaborate and share different issues that might have come up, that something like that, it's not going to come up in one of those meetings usually. It's going to be relayed through a manager at something that's specific to just kind of a leadership kind of retreat as well. So I think it's really important just to point that out as others are growing their agencies and make sure that you don't assume that if you have different things in place to try to catch some problems that might arise, that everything will actually come through, that you still need to seek it out and make sure that you're keeping a pulse on what's actually going on in the minds of your team members.
Absolutely. And, as a manager, there are a ton of topics that, I mean, we are human too, as owners, as managers, et cetera. And so there are things that we can communicate. There are things that we can't communicate. There are things that we shouldn't communicate. And there are things that, we've communicated in the past and have led to situations. I have been a part of a company, an owner of a company where we sort of showed all of the financials of the company. And we did that in a meeting with the entire team. And we had employees look at that and say, we only have, enough to make payroll for 2 or 3 months. That's it. I'm out. It's like, well, no, we're going to do more work, or we're going to get more money. And, but that is one of those situations where it's obvious to the owners how this system works. We've been living in it, but to the team, that sounded terribly risky. It is a little risky, no doubt, but that's what we sign up for as we build out teams in small agencies anyways.
Right. And evaluating how much information to share versus what to withhold based off of the risk tolerance of different groups on your team and even just individual team members in general. Do you find that you have to kind of cater to the least risk tolerant group more, or do you find ways to communicate differently to the various people on your team that have different abilities to handle risk?
you know, Given that experience, I am a little bit scarred. And so I do tend to work towards the target, the most risk averse. But that has been a topic of conversation in that we need to figure out other ways of communicating the health of the company. And so that has led to usually a weekly email or a message from me saying, here are all the new leads that we got this week, just so that people can see that there are leads coming in the door. Here are, you know, this abstract notion of, runway, which is not a great indicator for a company like us because the value is our people and their time. And as long as we can keep us busy, we build our own runway. But trying to abstract that into, you know, if all of our clients went away today, which is not going to happen, we would still be good for 2 months. And in that 2 months time, we could find other work. That is a thing that other owners are like, oh yeah, for sure. But to communicate that to the team and for them to hear we have 2 months worth of runway, it's a delicate balance and a thing that I've shied away from. And, you know, I've shied so far away that I wasn't sharing those things with my managers either because I know their background and they haven't been in this game. And so it's definitely a balance and it's one that I'm trying to get better at.
Yeah, and I think too, it probably varies agency to agency because the type of work that you're doing is different. The type of clients that you work with is totally different. Your sales cycle is going to be different. But in general, if you have the right people in the roles on your team, to have awareness of like, this is my job, this is what needs to happen. If they're in a business development kind of role, even if they don't know the exact number, they need to know like, okay, like we've got projects lined up through here. We need to start getting more projects for month X, Y, and Z kind of a situation and approach it that way. Now, you've scaled agencies from small to big multiple times in various amounts of time. Some of those were pretty quick. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences there? And if you could go back in time, would you scale as quickly as you did?
I think that every time I have been a part of an agency, we have scaled slower and more sustainably. And at the same time, there's always been a business development effort, and that can only sustain so many people. And so that's really the governor on the engine. And usually it's me. But I think that we have, I worked at the state of Wisconsin. We grew from 4 people to 35. I worked at Hash Rocket. We grew from 4 people to, I think, 30. Left there. I went to BendyWorks. We grew from, I was about the fourth person in there, and grew from there to, I think, 15. And then I started my own shop with a co-founder, and we grew over the course of 2 years. We grew to 10 people. And then he decided that he wanted to go back to working on a product, which he had been when I so rudely stole him from that. And in his absence, I don't think that, I don't know, subconsciously, I was probably trying to prove myself or whatever, but we grew to 26 people over the course of a year and a half, and then wound up having to do a steep decline and lay off some folks. There was recently there was the photo of the guy who posted a picture on LinkedIn with a tear because he had to lay off people and received a lot of backlash, which he rightly should have. But at the same time, laying off 52% of the company was the single hardest day of my career. And, I think lessons like that will slow your scale down for sure.
Yeah. And I think too, knowing that if you scale too fast, you will have to downsize is a good boundary to put in place as you get excited about all of the things that you could do. And oh, if we just hire this person, we can grow more. Well, ask yourself, what if we don't grow more, even if we hire this person? What happens to them? What happens to their family? Is there an alternative way for us to start growing more and get more consistent cash flow in so that we know that we can actually pay the salary for this person before bringing them on board? Kind of to round out our conversation a little bit, I do want to dig into this concept of processes and structure, any sort of, like templatized role descriptions or systems that you've put in place. What have you found to be the most important to scaling your agency? And what were some things that you tried that weren't as helpful as you thought they would be?
Great question. And also a place where I feel like we're not strong enough yet. We have folks on our team that are, you know, good at improvising. We can give them a task and they kind of know how to get work done. We also have people who are younger in their career or earlier in the career or have just a need for more process. And that is we have seen the most struggle with those folks. You have to look at what expectations are you setting for your people? Are they clear? That saying is like, whenever I find myself frustrated, upset, angry, I look at the situation and I have to think to myself, is the expectation that I hold realistic? Is it something that was communicated? And oftentimes, you know, whether it was or not, it helps lead the conversation to resolve the issue. And so I understand the need for more processes and structure and what have you. I am comfortable without them, but I think that is closer to, being informed by the fact that I am also risk tolerant. And so folks that are less risk tolerant are looking for those structures and understanding and clear expectation setting.
Also, there's differences in what kind of structure is needed based off of a role, right? So if you're trying to define and structure deliverables versus defining and structuring business development, those are two totally different ballgames. One is much more easy to define. That would be, how do you deliver versus business development. Tactics are changing, it's relationship building. And so it's just totally different. And so because you're the owner, you're the main biz dev person, you're living in that world as opposed to delivering and trying to achieve this consistency as well. So being mindful of that too, as other agencies are trying to scale, as an owner, you need to be aware, like, what is my style? What am I focusing on? And how is that different from what my team is focusing on and what they need? Any other final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with other agency owners?
I reverse engineered a mission statement for myself, but it is genuinely desire success in those around you and do what you can to make it happen. And there's just so much opportunity that comes from helping other people, but you can only do so much. So
Yes. Yes, you can't save the world, but you can help the people standing right in front of you. Thank you again to Jim for coming on and sharing your perspective on navigating agency growing pains and making sure that you have company culture in place, structure to scale, and some runway with cash reserve. I want to point out a couple of key moments from our conversation today. The first is that you should be identifying leaders who have influence within your team as opposed to appointing leaders with titles. You want to make sure that you have people that are going to be rallying up other team members as well, especially as you're growing and introducing new bodies into your agency, making sure that they have a place to be a part of as opposed to just feel like they're a cog in a machine can really be achieved in a much different way through leaders of influence on your team. The next thing I want to point out is that when you're starting to grow, having to navigate and wrestle through this concept of like how much sharing about the financial picture is too much sharing, especially with different members of your team. You need to navigate that on a case by case basis, in my perspective, but you need to communicate no matter what. You don't want a situation like what Jim ran into where people were worried that they needed to find other jobs because they hadn't heard anything from Jim and things seemed to be drying up. So communicate and over communicate. Remember that an expectation without communicating it is just a thought. And so you can't get upset with people if you're not communicating as you're growing and as you're developing your agency to sustain that growth as well. And finally, do be mindful that if you scale too quickly without that proper structure in place, without enough of a runway, and without enough cash reserves lined up, that you can create a bind for yourself. I don't recommend using lines of credit for growth. Like at max, what credit lines of credit should be used for is to preserve your assets, to make sure that you can retain top talent at your agency. It shouldn't be used for growth. The borrower is slave to the lender. And if you find yourself in that predicament, it's only one person who got you in that situation, and that would be you. So avoid it to begin with. Leverage cash, not credit, and make sure that you're scaling wisely. Make sure that you're growing intentionally and take your time to build the right relationships that are going to take you through the long haul. That's all for today's episode of RecalibrAgency. I'm your host, Danielle Clodo, and I'll have more for you soon.